Okay, hi. I'm Alyesha Wise, poet, teaching artist, and other things from Camden, New Jersey, living in LA now.
Nice. Hello, I am Matthew Cuban Hernandez. I'm a poet, rapper, actor, MC, teacher extraordinaire.
So yeah, I was 11 years old, and I was watching this movie called Poetic Justice. I was sitting in our apartment living room floor, and I was watching this movie. Probably shouldn't have been watching it, but anyway, the star of the movie is this really beautiful woman named Janet Jackson, and I was like, I want to be like her. And I didn't realize it wasn't her poems. The poems were by Maya Angelou. So anyway, long story short, it got me in it. I wanted to just be like someone who I thought, was really, really awesome. And then I ended up taking my poems seriously when it kind of changed my life. I remember doing some poetry at an open mic in my hometown, and someone in the audience started crying. And when I realized the impact poetry could have, I said, okay, I want to do this forever and ever.
Yeah. That's like similar experiences. For me, it was the only thing I was like good at. I'm like wildly mediocre at everything, and then this was like the one thing I cornered the market on when I was like 13, and did like a little poetry workshop that you do in school, and wrote something that felt good, that felt like really, really nice, and then kind of I was like the baby in my family, so this was one of the rare few times I could get anybody to listen to me. Which was like dope, like having everyone's attention was not something I was used to. So I just kind of kept going down that road of trying to have something worth saying to hold someone's attention. And yeah, one thing led into another, and it just kind of became, I was like, oh, okay, I'm doing poetry. I didn't realize what I was doing was poetry. I thought I was just writing raps that didn't go well on beats. But I was like, this works, and started realizing I was telling more stories and digging more deep into my own story. And realizing that, we are our family story keepers. So once that became something in me, I was like, okay, I have to continue to tell these stories. Man, yeah, I was, we had went through the book and read it. And then when we were watching the film, it was dope to see how, because film isn't always exactly right on to what is written in the book. So it was interesting to see how the directions that they took in some of the elements. But it was also really cool to see like the visuals of what the city actually looked like. And it looked a lot like Jacksonville. Like it looked a lot like the city I grew up in, just in like the way things were, just where the downtown was in versus like where the hood is, where like some of the nicer areas are. It was just like very, very similar. So for me, it just felt like I wanted to tell these stories from the perspective of some of just how I grew up in the hood and what it was like for me. But it made me, after watching the book, it was like these constant events that kept happening to the character, and then she was just kind of like finding ways to roll through it. But specifically in the film, I didn't hear them really digging into what her depression was or the trauma that came after having that effect. So I really wanted to tell the poems from the perspective of surviving that and the residual effects you get from being surrounded by traumatic events.
And along those lines, I was thinking about like the fact that she felt like she had to suppress or not tell her story a lot. And that's a real thing. Sometimes, I was talking about being from Camden and how that felt. Yeah, I was writing poems about it, but I was also running away from it at the same time. Mm-hmm. Like I was writing about it, but I wouldn't talk about it a lot. I was low-key a little bit ashamed of like the stuff I went through and everything. Poems just made it easier because it sounds fancy. But poems can also be like, I'm not telling people not to write poems, because I definitely tell people poetry is medicine, but I feel like sometimes once you get used to that, it becomes safe and we don't deal with it outside of the poetry. And I wasn't really talking about where I was from. I was running from that. I was running from the trauma. And now I'm like, nah, that shaped me. And even though I'm not trying to live in it, I want to be able to say, yes, this is who I am. This is all the things I've been through, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. And she dealt with that. She dealt with thinking people were going to judge her or put her in a box. And I'm like, only person that could put me in a box is me, So that took a while to learn, and I get it. I resonated with that a lot. And I also thought about how I've grown into me today. So yeah.
That's right. I think for me, like the first poem I did in the assembly is called Resurrection, and it's actually a really old piece, but it had so much like heart in it. It was actually a poem that I created alongside with a friend of mine named Moses West out in Jacksonville. And so we wanted to just create something that just like felt like we were alive in spite, and it became one of those poems for us. But I think the poem that's like really just keeps coming back around is the poem Challenger that I read about my students that are incarcerated. So much of my life is circled around trying to tell those stories because when I think of like the stories that don't get the opportunity to get told, there's vast amounts of them. But when I narrow it to like who's getting some of the least opportunities to tell those stories, and it's a lot of times the incarcerated young men and women that I work with, sometimes they're just completely forgot about. And so, yeah, I try to tell their stories and be an advocate for them as much as possible. So that poem is something that's close to my heart.
My favorite one for a long time was the poem Trauma that I did in both assemblies today. Because even though I feel like it's not the poem that gets like the biggest applause in a lot of spaces, and that's not to down it. I really, really love it. I think in my opinion, I think it's a great poem, but I like that I was able to let so much out and tell the story of trauma in a way that I haven't talked about it before. And also I got to explore my imagination. My imagination is my favorite muscle. I feel like a lot of human beings lose their imagination. I feel like it's so good, it's so powerful. And at the end, I got a chance to envision a world where all this terrible stuff doesn't happen and we can just live in our, I'm thinking about like my family who's impacted by trauma. I'm thinking about the fact that some of them can't walk down a certain block in a certain type of t-shirt. And I'm like, in this world, we can do whatever we want and we can still turn up. We can still be real black or real hood or whatever, but without all the terrible stuff that comes with it. And yeah, it was fun. And it also allows me to I breathe a little easier afterwards, even if I cry. Which, no, I don't cry, whatever. But now the poem I did in the first assembly, which is inspired by Mr. Rogers, is one of my favorite because first of all, it's one of my newer poems. And second of all, I got to just talk about people loving people in a very creative way. And usually a poem like that sounds super cheesy. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to write it without it sounding like I was just like, okay, all lives matter and everybody should just love each other and get along. And not saying that all lives don't matter, but that's another conversation. But I wanted to write it in a way that it was like, I want to be real about things, but I still want to say just how much I feel like we can all just like get beyond all this hateful crap that we deal with.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's very scary to hear your own voice. Like even just to hear your own voice say whatever, right? And I think sometimes we start hearing our own voice, we start breaking, our voice starts to crack, we start to cry, and we're thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this because my body's having a reaction I don't like from it. But that's just your adrenaline pumping. That's just kind of like more and more energy telling you should share it. So I think, yeah, you gotta get this stuff out. It's very worth doing. It's not just for yourself, but for the people that look like you, that sound like you, or maybe not as strong as you are, that are thinking that their voice is worthless. Because nobody's voice is worthless. You should definitely tell your story. You'll gain power from it. I like, and it doesn't always have to be good or bad. I like saying like, if you see like the end of 8 Mile, I always talk about like the end of 8 Mile. And he's like, yeah, y'all beat me up. Yeah, y'all got my girl. I'm still out here, whoop-de-whoop-whoop. And, what he's really saying is he's putting all his things out there, all the things he's afraid of, all the things he's nervous, has anxiety about, the things he doubts about himself. And he says it in front of this audience, and then he hands the mic to the guy, and he's like, tell these people something they don't know about me. And the guy says nothing. He can't say anything. In fact, all the things he said negative about himself were the things that he felt were his insecurities became his most powerful tool. And so to me, that is something you get the benefit from by sharing your story. Even when you feel the most vulnerable, you get to share your story because honesty is powerful. I always say my most favorite form of poetry is honesty. And it's easy to be honest. It's hard because not everybody does it, but it is also one of the most easy, most revealing, and sometimes the most poetical thing you can do is just be honest. So tell your story.
Yeah, tell your story. Like the ability to be able to like own my story and my narrative is so powerful to me. Words are magic. And I really believe in the way you write your story, the way you tell it, the way you decide to put it out there. You can just write yourself into a beautiful existence. Yeah. So that's what I've been doing, and I treat it like double dutch. I don't know if y'all know what double dutch is, but it's a old school like rope game, and it's it's people on both ends, and it's two ropes, and you're just like this, and it's a scary rope to jump in. You know, it's nervous. It's nerve-wracking, but you can do it. You know, it's all about jumping in a rope. Like just find that moment. You know, and if you mess up, try again. You know, and it's coming from someone who's really bad at double dutch, by the way. But anyway, yeah, and it will be uncomfortable. Finding your voice will be uncomfortable because you're diving into a very vulnerable state. And we've seen students literally go like, you want me to do what? Show my emotions, and they shut down. But it's all about jumping into that rope. Like you'll find your power before you know it. You're just jumping, you're doing tricks, you know, and it's great. It's a powerful thing. So.
And growth doesn't happen comfortably, you know? Like, you know, when you find yourself in uncomfortable situations, you're usually growing. When somebody is going through physical hurt or emotional or mental or spiritual, whatever it is they're going through, there's a lot of growth that's happening in there. So just know when you're having your hardest times, you're usually going through your biggest growth.
Yep. I think my biggest thing is to find your magic. And I know that sounds, it's like, well, I don't know where it's at. But if you find something that you really feel like helps you just like let it all out, all those things we hold in, I would say, you know, try your best to stick to it. There are people who start writing and they say, oh, I've met adults who say, oh, I used to write and I just stopped because this and that happened. Just try to find the easiest moments to be able to write and jot it down. Don't stop doing the things that make you feel the most magical or powerful. Even if that is just like being there for other human beings and you haven't really found your talent or your gift or whatever yet. Whatever you're good at, that takes you beyond the things you're used to, takes you beyond like the surface level of living. Keep diving into that and keep doing it. Whatever your magic is, and sometimes it doesn't hit you. You may change your mind over and over and over. I used to think I was going to be a criminal psychologist, and I still love it. I'm very passionate about social justice and criminal justice and law and psychology. But I ended up becoming a poet full time. Didn't think that was going to happen, but this is my magic now. And if it changes 10 or 20 years from now, cool. But right now, this is like what I'm sticking to. So stick to it. It's worth it. Because it wasn't always easy, especially being a full-time writer. Wasn't easy, and I stuck to it. So.
There's so many things I want to say.
I know, right?
Okay. This time will not last forever. A year from now, you'll be a drastically different person. Whatever hardship you're going through, it will end. It will shift into something else. I promise you it won't last forever. You do not have to be the coolest person in the school, right? Most of the cool people I knew in school are okay people right now. They're not the coolest ones anymore. I wasn't exactly the coolest person in school. Take time to love yourself, treat yourself, take time on yourself, give yourself patience and understanding. Speak to yourself the way you would speak to somebody you love and care for. And tell your story. It's totally worth writing. I'm just a random dude from Jacksonville, Florida, who took the time to write down my story, and I've been able to see the entire world, or a lot of it, more of it than I thought I would ever see. Your story is important. I guarantee you it's important. You just have to get up the nerve to say it, and you're worth saying it. So take some time, love yourself, love your work, love your process, whatever it is. Take time for time out, and be kind. Kindness will come back. Stuff comes in circles. Whatever you put out comes back. You speak things into existence. You say, oh, I'm nothing. I'll never be anything. The universe hears that and gives you what you want. When you say, oh, I'm great, I'm meant for great things, people will love me, I love myself, I'm worthy of love, all those things come to you. And you are worthy of love, and you're worthy of listening to, and I can't wait to read your poetry.